Senator McLachlan. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Madam President. I rise for a purpose of a question to the proponent of the resolution.
Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Duff, I'm wondering why this bill, this resolution, was not referred to the Government Administration and Elections Committee for a public hearing. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, we thought that this should be on the desk of senators in an expeditious manner, which is why we did an emergency certified bill.
Senator McLachlan.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, with all due respect, we have an emergency in the state of Connecticut, but it's not this resolution. The emergency that we have in the state of Connecticut is our government budget process is badly broken. We have people lined up every single day asking to speak to legislators about the broken budget process, about the challenges that they will face providing services to residents of Connecticut because our budget process is taking away money that was promised in previous budget deliberations. If we're going to have a discussion about anything that has to do with the United States Senate or the federal government, perhaps better language for a resolution to Washington, all of the parties that are going to receive a copy of this resolution apparently, the appropriate thing for us to talk about is, Washington, why don't you balance your budget? Do you realize that in Washington, if they don't have the money, they print it? Can you imagine if Governor Malloy and the majority party here in the state of Connecticut decided that they didn't have enough money and we just started printing money here at the state capitol? But that's what they do at the United States Capitol. And that's what this resolution, if we're going to send a resolution to Washington, that's what we ought to be talking about. There's a real serious problem. The current administration in Washington has taken on more long-term debt for United States taxpayers than all of his predecessors combined. Think about that just for a minute. Our current president and this Congress and the previous Congresses that have served under this president have increased the debt to United States taxpayers, the United States government debt, exceeding all of the debt created by every single president of the United States before him. Now, who doesn't think that that's not a serious problem? Debt now approaching $19 trillion. $5 trillion of that in recent years. You see, government has a serious, serious problem. State government in Connecticut is out of control with spending because we can't learn to live within our means. And we keep going back to the well. The well are the working people of Connecticut. Those are the kinds of problems that we should be talking about. Trying to send this document to Washington and tell United States senators that frankly don't really care what the Connecticut Senate has to say about their deliberations is a big waste of time. We should be focusing our time today and every day until May 3rd on how to fix the broken budget in the state of Connecticut. That's what we've got to focus on. The United States Constitution doesn't specify how many justices are required to be seated in the United States Supreme Court. Not in the Constitution. We have 8 today. Someday we'll have 9 again. But if the United States Senate, the majority of the United States Senate, has determined that it's not an appropriate time to make an appointment, given the explosive political atmosphere that we're in at this time, then so be it. That's their decision. And if the voters in the United States of America don't agree with that, well, then they have an opportunity to let them know their disagreement on Election Day. That's between the voters and the United States Senate. And us wasting time today is between the voters of Connecticut and this legislative body. Now, I got to tell you, when I tell my bosses, who are my constituents, that we came into session in the state Senate today to write a letter to Congress and the President and say, fill up the vacancy in the Supreme Court, and spend a day doing that, they're going to say, are you out of your mind? What are you doing? We keep hearing about all the problems in state government. We keep hearing about companies abandoning the state of Connecticut. We keep hearing about retirees rushing to a favorable climate and a favorable tax state for their quiet, enjoyable retirement. And we want to send a letter to Congress. That's what we're doing today. With all due respect to the proponents of this resolution, I always have a problem when we do anything in the state Senate that doesn't have a public hearing. There's nothing that aggravates me more is emergency certified budgets that don't get a public hearing. There's nothing that aggravates me more when the implementer bills, which are full of gremlins and monsters, don't get a public hearing before we have an opportunity to deliberate and study the legislation. So on that point, this idea of a resolution here today fails in my mind because it didn't have a public hearing. What we need to be doing from this day forward is focusing on the residents of Connecticut. How many of our residents are hurting, and how many more are going to be harmed by proposed budget cuts that we see in front of us? But how many people who are going to be affected by the budget deliberations in the state capitol have any control over what's happening? Yes, they have a vote on Election Day, but they really feel like the state capitol's not listening to them. They really feel like, why is it that we've proven we're in need, we have services being provided to us for years, they're reasonably cost, in many cases through nonprofit providers, and now you're saying we can't have that anymore? Education funding is a challenge. This building likes to pass on unfunded mandates to municipalities, so now you're demanding certain things of municipalities, and you're telling the local property taxpayers and local first selectmen and boards of selectmen and mayors that it's their responsibility to pick up our slack? This building, this legislature can't even honor its obligations for education funding in the state of Connecticut. Now, I could go on for hours and hours on the topic of priorities misguided at the state capitol in this legislative session. But this is a waste of our time. Our bosses, the residents of Connecticut, really deserve more from us than this, I think. I think they deserve to have from us a laser beam focus on what's broken in Connecticut and fix it, darn it. And do it this year. Stop kicking the can down the road in Hartford, legislators, governor. You got the problem on the table, fix it. And by the way, stop sending me a bigger tax bill. Learn to live within your means. Anybody remember learning that in 6th, 7th, 8th grade when they got their first big pile of cash in a birthday card? What are you going to do with that money? I mean, those are the lessons that we've learned as children. But we somehow have forgotten those lessons when we get to become elected officials. Let's refocus our efforts. Let's zero in on what's really broken in Connecticut. And let the voters decide what happens in Washington, D.C. That's their call. We don't need to be wasting our time interfering with the business of the United States Senate. Last but not least, it's amazing to me that somehow this legislature ignores federal law time and time and time again, but now we want to tell them how to interpret the Constitution. Oh, what's he talking about now? Well, how about drug laws, federal drug laws? How about immigration laws in Connecticut, where we look in the other way? I mean, I can go on and on and on. We just ignore, oh, we don't like that law of the federal government, so we're going to ignore it, sort of like some people in Washington do. Those aren't what the people of this country and this state want. We have laws. We're a land of laws. We have a responsibility as legislators to balance our budget and to stop passing the buck to the taxpayers. So I respectfully urge my colleagues to reject this notion today, this resolution today. Our focus is misguided. It should be focused like a laser beam on the residents of Connecticut. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. You remark, Senator